All right. Trino contributor call, 25th of July. The heat of summer is on, and we are talking Trino. What is happening in the Trino ecosystem and what's going on with contributions and more. Have a couple of announcements and other things to discuss, and then we are open to talk about whatever the audience that joined us so gracefully wants to talk about. I think this is not going to happen because that person is not here. So first announcement, Trino Summit is announced. Call for speakers, sponsors, and registrations are open. So please do think about topics to present at Trino Summit. It's a 2-day event. We opened it up more in terms of like how technical it can be. Like we want like easier beginner talks as well, but we also want to go all the way deep and technical. So whatever you really want to talk about that's related to Trino would be awesome. Hint, hint, hint. We definitely need to talk about Trino Gateway since there's some people in the audience. So that's the first thing. Anything else? Any questions or so about Trino Summit? All right, cool. Next item I had was we have a packaging roadmap item that's still in progress. I'm still working on that, and then we're going to start work on that as discussed at the Trino contributor congregation to figure out smaller Docker containers with minimum plugins, smaller tarball, optional add-in of plugins that are just very, very big in anticipation of us getting too big in terms of a tarball being really, really large or the Docker container being really large. It's coming. It's going to take a bit of a while to do more work. The other heads up, we are going to do a contributor, maintainer, and skills kind of matrix coming to the website. So it will be a bit easier for people to look up who they can reach out to help for and who they can work with, and like also as a like roadmap towards reaching out in the community and working with everyone. So that's coming as well. A community effort to refresh the UI has started, and that's going along. So that's based on a similar stack to what we have at Trino Gateway. We'll probably have to organize a separate meeting for that because it's really, really big as a project, obviously, but also really, really exciting. Also very different because it's a JavaScript stack. So some of us don't know what that all means. But just a heads up, that's on the way. So if anyone is interested in participating on that and so on, just keep an eye on. There's a roadmap item for it, and there is like a PR ready to put the scaffolding in place and more. So should be interesting. And then the last one is about the file system support. Maybe David isn't here. Martin or Dane, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the plan is we're going to activate the new file systems by default, and eventually we'll be removing the old ones, like probably much later in the year. We've done some pretty extensive testing and it's working out for us. And we're not getting any more feedback, so we're thinking we're ready to switch. Obviously, you can run the old one until it's removed if you want. Although I have to say that's not a great plan because then when we do remove it, you don't have the opportunity to flip back if you have problems. So.
But essentially what that will mean, it will be a breaking change in the sense that if you rely on any properties from the old stuff, they won't work anymore because the old stuff will be deactivated and you have to actively switch it back on if you want to rely on that. We're going to obviously add that to the release notes and all that kind of stuff, but coming soon, basically.
Yeah, the properties aren't the same, and some of the stuff that Hive was doing doesn't make any sense with the new UIs, and we just decided to take the opportunity to clean everything up.
Cool. That's all the topics I had.
Oh, by the way, this is for everything that is not HDFS. HDFS will remain HDFS until HDFS dies or someone writes a reasonable new good client, which is probably never going to happen.
Cool. All right. So I'm gonna put you on the spot, Kent. What do you want to talk about?
Sure.
Tell us your progress on your work.
So I kind of have a little bit of bad news with that. It's looking like we're not going to get approval to work on the LCA, the lateral column aliasing. We're kind of doing deep dive, and it looks like there's just not enough time savings in order to do that. So that's the reason why I haven't been making progress on that. I haven't gotten the opportunity to do any of that at my actual day job. Kind of up in the air if I'll look into it like on the side. I have a little bit of a busy personal life, so not sure how much time I can put into it outside of work. So sorry for the bad news.
Okay. That's what happens.
Can you explain what the column aliasing is supposed to be, or what problem it's trying to solve?
Sure. So basically what lateral column aliasing is that you can declare like a column alias and then use that alias immediately like in another column. So like for example, a+1 as foo and then bar plus or foo +1 as bar. And basically it kind of allows you to simplify and like write concise queries. If you have like a complicated calculation and then you want to like reuse that calculation in other places, without LCA, your options are you can copy and paste the calculation in wherever you want to use it, or you can do like a uh I forgot the technical term, but like a subquery. A subquery to like
Great, yeah.
yeah.
Common table expression.
Common table expression, yes.
Yeah.
So our users at Remitly, like once Redshift added LCA, they heavily started using it. And so we were thinking like, okay, we needed, it would save us time if we were able to implement it in Trino. But I think that the concern here is that Martin said that it would be like a very extensive and long project. And so if we're talking like a month of my time, then there's probably value there. But if it's like 12 weeks of my time, then it's hard for Remitly to justify it.
Yeah, the main issue that we still need to research and figure out is there are some very tricky. So it changes the scoping rules for SQL, and depending on how you do it, the scoping rules can be incompatible with standard SQL, and that's problematic because it means that you run a query, you have a query that runs and run before, and it produces a different result in the new version. So that's one issue. And the other issue is it's not very clear how it interacts with things like aggregations, window functions, because in SQL, when you have a select clause with aggregation window functions, they look like they are at the same level, scoping level, but they're actually all very different. There's different, it's 3 or 4 scoping levels smooshed together. So lateral column aliases just mess all that stuff up. So we have to figure out what the precise rules are for that.
I could summarize this as if you really want to make your brain hurt, go and try and read the scoping rules. It is insanely complicated and really not obvious of what is actually supposed to happen. Like writing down what is correct is a non-trivial task.
Sorry, there on Manfred, on that comment you made of change scoping rules cannot be compatible. There is a way to make it compatible, but it has the danger of being error prone or brittle in the face of changes to the underlying tables. So
yeah, I think part of the trick here is understanding So it's understanding like, if we do X, here are the consequences. If we do Y, here are the consequences. And part of those consequences are, oh, well, this works with SQL, with standard SQL, but then people who come from Redshift or Snowflake or some system that has it, oh, it works slightly different. So they're going to be confused. So like, this is a classic area where like there are only wrong answers and you have to choose the least offensive wrong answer.
Or don't choose any answer at all, but that's to be determined.
I mean, not having it could be considered a wrong answer by some. So like there's no perfect here.
Yeah,
It's like you just have to navigate this very messy space.
It's also a kind of change that once you make it, it's very hard to take back because it's in the public API or interface of Trino. So those changes cannot be made lightly.
I guess it would also mean that different implementations on that in different databases behave differently. And then it's like, well, which do you choose? Like whoever people migrate from, they have a different experience and going to be like unhappy.
They do, and they're all in. I mean, I did a very superficial survey of what they do, and it's all different. So.
That's bad.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'll
well,
have one thing to add. I did reach out to the SQL Standards Committee on this, and they said that it wasn't something that they were working on. So he did say like, oh, if you want us to work on it, you can ask, but
yeah, I saw your comment, Kent. I was actually going to ask you which contact do you have, and I mean, I've never been able to find how you get into those discussions.
it was not easy.
Okay.
Let me switch over to my work computer. I'm on my personal PC, and see if I can find that. If you
That's fine. You can do it later. Then I need to.
Okay, I'll do it later. I'll send you like the contact that I had.
yeah, that would be great help because
Also,
ultimately,
if you can tell me like how you navigated to find that person and
I'll have to
Yep.
refresh my memory, but I'll do my best.
Okay, thanks.
that'd be super helpful. Thank you, Kent. All right. Lateral column aliasing on hold. What's next? That's moving forward.
I mean, it's on hold unless we get someone else to spend time on that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I do want to say, I would suggest if you do have any research that we dump it somewhere. So like the next person who wants to pick it up, like,
Yeah,
we'll have
like
a little bit of a head start.
maybe I'll convince my boss to let me like write up whatever we have, like in terms of like the edge cases, and at least finish that doc.
Yeah, by the way, Ken, so like if you can convince your company to give you time to at least like help with the research. I mean, it doesn't need to be a long commitment, but that can help kickstart the process. I mean, we can
Yeah.
have other people do implementation if you don't have time to work on that.
Okay, I'll float that with my boss, and also like I think that part of it is like a lack of clarity on like exactly what the scope of work is. So maybe what I'll tell her is that like, well, if we can do some of the additional research, then maybe surprisingly the scope will be like, oh, it's only a month of work, in which case it becomes like a little bit of a better value prop for us.
Cool.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because once we know, we also can like gauge interest from others, right? Like, and like make a bit more noise about it. And who knows, someone might have other use cases.
I would guess this is a project where once we have a design we agree on, the implementation's not super painful, but
probably not. It's all in the analyzer and in the initial planner. So, I mean, it might be tricky, but I mean, we've done trickier stuff than that. So.
Yeah.
All right. Someone break the silence. What do you want to talk about?
So it's just one. I mean, if no one has anything, it's one thing I wanted to bring up. So I mean, a few months ago, we implemented a new scheduling algorithm for the scheduling drivers inside a worker, which is based on, it's a completely different, well, it's a completely different implementation. It's based on the fair scheduling algorithm that Linux uses, similar to what Linux uses in how it schedules processes onto CPUs and all that. So it's already implemented, integrated, it's active by default, and it works in most cases, but there are some edge condition that is causing it to, blow up. I mean, it manifests in, I think, threads piling up and then eventually cluster crashing. So we haven't been able to, I mean, I haven't been able to reproduce it myself. And if people have been trying it and have seen issues with that they can reproduce, it would be extremely helpful to be able to diagnose that. Unfortunately, it's one of those areas where it's super highly concurrent code, and I mean, and it tends to be like complicated to debug and diagnose when things happen. So if we have at least a characterization of what are the conditions under which it happens, then we can start narrowing it down. So if anyone has seen that or has time to focus on that, that would be great.
What
We
version?
the goal is to replace the old scheduling algorithm, which is still present and it can be activated with a flag, but we want to replace that and change the model for how the drivers and the operators work. And this is the first step to be able to do that.
Yeah. Once we can move to this model, we can dramatically simplify the way drivers work and the operators.
And eventually we can switch to virtual threads in the new versions of Java when time comes and so on. But
so if people want to help with that, or like, what do they do?
Well, first, talk to me. I mean, we can
Okay.
I can give an overview of what that thing does, and then we can talk about like potentially, like especially if you've seen issues, we can navigate through what the test was, what happened, and maybe I can give enough context that the person can go and try to get some diagnostics from the system.
Cool. Yeah, if anyone sees anything on Trino Slack on discussions or GitHub issues or whatever else, please also just like keep that in mind and just flag Martin for that. And I guess I'll do that. Brian, if you're doing any grooming or so.
What version did this go into?
Sorry, what?
What version did this go into? These scheduler changes?
It's been a few releases back. It's enabled by default, but you can disable with a property.
Okay. And do you have any designs for like the full scope of what changes are coming after this fair scheduling algorithm?
Part of the changes are in the context of Hummingbird, Project Hummingbird, but basically the idea is change the model to like make the loops, the driver loops, like a linear operation, not something, how today the driver runs for a little bit and then at the edges of an operator decide where to park it and queue it up and bring a new one. So the idea would be now a driver loop is just a single it's like an end-to-end thread. It looks like an end-to-end thread where you're just looping through the pipeline, and then would yield points in the middle that allow the scheduler to decide to park the thread or not. And then eventually that will be a virtual thread, in which case it's just it doesn't even exist as a real thread. And then once we have that,
the big difference is right now to park work, we have to unwind the stack and then put the job object on a side place. with this model, you have a thread assigned to the driver, and then it can yield without changing the stack.
Yeah.
So this makes the code dramatically simpler to write and understand.
It's simpler to write, to understand. We can then, I mean, part of the motivation is we can use virtual threads. We can start thinking about, for example, with the new APIs in Java, you can do thread-based confinement of memory and accounting. So we can start doing more, better management of resources and memory. There's a structured concurrency which allows you to do like you have a proper stack, so you can do structured concurrency and know that your stack is not going to switch in the middle or you're going to be in a different thread or anything like that. And then it allows us to write operators in a different way, and that's part of the thing we're looking at.
Because they're super complicated now, just because of the way concurrency works.
Yeah. So until we have virtual threads that they're implemented as real, OS level threads. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always level threads, but they have yield points, and the scheduler either parks, basically tells the thread stop or pause, and then goes and moves on to another one. So the concurrency is still limited by the scheduler. It's just
just to be clear, like it isn't clear if virtual threads are going to help ever with the design, because the system actually is actively managing the number of things that are active and assigned to a thread, and it's actively managing like when things are available to run or not available to run. So it's possible that like virtual threads never help with this, but it gives us the capabilities of doing it. The project actually started with how do we make virtual threads run, figured out they didn't run, but then in the process, Martine came up with an idea of like, hey, you can actually do this without virtual threads, because we have a bunch of advantages already in the way we've designed things. So it's just a much, if we can get everything on it and be happy with it, it unlocks the ability to just simplify like huge chunks of the code base.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah. Well, plus the scheduling algorithm is better than the multi-level feedback queue that we had before.
It's a lot better. Yeah,
it's doesn't have all those heuristics of, oh, if you run for 1 second, then you are in the first tier. If you run for 10 seconds, you're in the second. It's like there's fewer parameters you have to deal with. So yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why I had, I don't know, anyone else?
Oh, I got something if I can hijack it.
Sure, go for it.
And I think the other Eric is going to chime in too, because we seem to both have similar use cases. Is it okay if I share?
Go.
I had to remove non-proprietary stuff from the screen. So let me explain the problem that we're having. So as I said, Bloomberg is a very old company, right? We got data and systems going back 40 years. The problem is that we have pet names in the middle of the data. Let's just call it like a catalog called Alpha. Nobody knows of then customer ABC. So what we want to do is we want to be able to remap the data on the fly using aliasing or views or something, to meaning this might be the real path of the data laid out according to something 10 years ago, but we don't want to expose it that way to external entities. We want to come up with a way of coming up with a business path to make it, to rename the data according to the domain of it, not org charts or some really weird pet names that occurred, right? So in this case, there might be somebody with a report called attributions for week, but we want to name it workflows, reports, attributions. Okay. Keep in mind that this name here is generated by external entities, right? We don't control that, and it's not unique. So That means there's many, many, many people that could have this exact same report name across different domains, right? So what we've been experimenting with, and I'll get down here in a minute, was trying to do something like views, where you could just create a new catalog called workflows, and then I think reports to the schema. I think this was a Comcast approach, if I recall correctly. And then you could do a materialized views on top of it to kind of grab it from one to another. And you could use this bucketing here as a way to define between the different customers that would have this exact same report name. So what we need to do is we need to dynamically flip this in and out depending upon who the customer is. Because right in Iceberg, it's a self-describing data set. All the data is laid out. We think we can do that because this report, depending upon who the customers, will have a different shape, different number of columns, etc. So the schemas will not be identical between the systems. So we could do a refresh.
So question. So if you have customer ABC logs into the system and they select from workflows, reports, attribution, weeks, month, you send them to their data set. And if customer DEF logs in and then run the same query, they will create a different data set.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. But let me give you one twist to the deal too. Just because your customer ABC, I can't give you the business use cases a win, but various individuals at ABC customer that log in need to see different views of the same data. They cannot be the same view. In some cases, it's regulatory. In some cases, it's something completely different. So we need to be able to not only flip it, but we also need to change the view of what that actually user is seeing. And sometimes that same user cannot see two different views at the same time. They can only see one particular isolated view. They may log out and change something, log back in, and we need to be able to feed those properties in one more time to change the view that they're seeing of the content.
So when you
Is
say
this read only?
This is read only, 100% Dane.
So when you say different, it's one customer has to see different views. Sorry, yeah, within one customer, two people have to see different views. Is it subsets of the same data set, or is it completely different data sets?
Subsets of the same data.
Okay, because that you can do with row filters and column. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Column. But yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
You can do it.
So I don't know if this is. I've only heard one of the two use cases. Is the other Eric's use case the same? Read only, same kind of thing.
Yeah, ours is similar to the second one. We don't have this kind of like same table name, completely different data challenge, but we have compliance obligations that make it so that depending on the persona who's accessing the data, you need to be able to see different views of that data. As you said, for the simplest use cases, row filters work for that, but we have some more complex one where it's not just like, these rows are excluded, but the shape of the data changes to some extent. For example, a column may become obfuscated and like the data type changes, or we completely remove the column, not just mask it by replacing it with some invalid values. So both row filters and column masks like almost do what we need, but not quite. And so what we have been doing so far is to satisfy this use case, we have a team that's compliance focused that builds views on top of data sets. And there are different views built for different personas to provide you the sort of correct compliant access pattern to the underlying data set. And so what we've done for now is added some hooks in the analyzer to kind of redirect users to the appropriate view, depending on what line of business they fall under. But I'm interested in seeing if this is something that we can model as part of the access control plugin, similar to row filters and column masks, but in a way that is more general and less structured, right? Where you sort of get to insert arbitrary view logic on top of a table as opposed to the kind of structured way that row filters and column masks add.
Is this read only also?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for Eric, Bloomberg Eric, I think the answer for you is you write a view catalog, which is something we've talked about in the past, because you actually even have completely different catalog names. So it would be a new connector that all it does is return views, and the views you source from whatever backend you want. Like you make a web request or wherever you want, and then you have simple views that you're producing. That's pretty straightforward. Like we've talked about doing something generic in the past. The problem is it's like, great, I have a view catalog. Where are the views stored? And it's like the answer to that is an infinite set of choices. So I think it'd be pretty easy to write one in a couple hours to do that for yourself.
Couple hours. Oh, damn. I got PayPal. You ready for that?
I mean, a catalog a connector that only returns views is not. It's like you need to figure out which of the APIs you implement, but it's probably not that complicated.
Right, and it's also like you're not storing anything; you're just reading some other place and synthesizing a query. So it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even need to produce metadata because like views are self-describing, so it's much simpler than even a synthetic table. For LinkedIn, Eric, my guess is you don't want to change the catalog name to something entirely new, in which case I don't know how you do what you want to do. That's a way more I mean, there is an answer. You have a custom metastore. Just change what the metastore returns.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what we have done. We're doing
It's ugly.
We're doing it in the analyzer for now because it solves some challenges. Like, as we said, we don't want this on the right path. Also, if if someone tries to read table foo and you replace it with a view that reads table foo, then the next time you're still reading table foo, that's going to get replaced with a view and on down. If you do it at the metastore layer, it doesn't have that context that like this is in the scope of re-resolving a view. So that's why we've done it in the analyzer for now. You have a little bit more of that contextual information that helps you kind of do it in a sane way. But it can be done at the metastore layer. Just it requires a lot more hacks to work around the like read access only and non-recursive kind of way.
Well, views are read only, so that's why I asked that first today. I mean,
but
it's possible to write to a view in SQL, but like we don't support it.
Some views.
Yeah, but at the metadata layer, like all you get is like, here's a table name, what should I return for this, right? Is it a view? Is it a table? What's the value? So at that point, you don't know if it's a view or a table, or like you don't know if it's a read or a write. And so if the metastore wants to always respond, hey, when you look up table foo, I'm going to give you a view, it doesn't know if that's happening in the context of a write.
Wait, so users, if they're reading, they see one thing, and if they're writing, it's a different thing.
So if you do a select, you may see a column of type integer, and then you try to insert, and it says, "Oh no, I lied. It's a varchar."
Yeah, I mean, in practice, the persona who can write to the view won't have a filtered view. Like they'll be able to see the data, right? They own that data. They will actually see the base table. So you're right. It may be the case that we can get away with saying like, if you just deny the write, if it's the wrong persona that would have filtering applied, you might be able to get away with something there.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is you could do this in the Metastore, at least on the either in the code by adding a new implementation of Hive Metastore or in your backend. You would have to disable caching because you're going to have different users have different views of the world.
Yep.
And you're saying return a view that does all the processing.
Yeah. Can be a view, can be view text. Either way is kind of acceptable for our use case. And you can use either one to model the other.
Right.
I have the same use cases as Eric too. Ours is just a bit complex.
So, kind of a side question here. Have you guys seen any other system that does something similar? And how do they model?
Yeah, I haven't tried to survey, but yeah, I can look into it.
Like for like if you don't have Trino available and you had to do it with whatever else you would be running, how would you do it?
Customized services that were custom coded to these use cases. Nothing generic. I've never seen anything generic that could handle this.
Yeah. So back to like the very top of this, could this theoretically be done as access control? I remember when column mass first came around, my big question to Martine was like, how does anyone actually deal with this? Because like the filters could change the type and blah blah blah. And then we found out that literally no one supported type changes in their column masks. And we're like, okay, so this is actually fairly straightforward. Now that doesn't mean it's not possible to change the type or anything, but that's a I don't know where the column masks, because it has to happen during analysis.
Yep.
Like that's where types are decided. Like yeah.
I mean, the column mask gets decided during analysis, but I think the bigger question is what are the implications on everything else? Like if you have I don't know, there's lots of usability implications. There's like what does describe return? I mean, there's issues with portability of queries. Like if you have you have a query that you plug into the results into some other thing, and then someone else runs the query. Now the thing just doesn't work because you don't have columns available or the types are completely wrong. So it's almost like you are designing a bespoke database for every user. And yeah, that's.
I mean, you do have that already though, because you have pass-through security. And pass-through security, like every user can see different tables.
Yeah. I mean, you do, but that's inside the. I mean, it's opaque to the engine.
Is it opaque to the engine? It's opaque to the engine, but the connectors need to be deeply aware of it. And it's the end user who's using the system. Like I could be sitting there and like describing a table and I see something and you describe it and you see something completely different.
And row filters and column maps already do that, right?
Well, this is to a completely different extent. So like the way that pass-through security works is like I could describe the table and it has columns A, B, and C, and Martine describes it and it has column W. And they don't even need to connect to the same backend system. Like I could be connecting to the Dane, MySQL, and Martine could be connecting to his MySQL. Like there's no constraints on it at all when you have pass-through security. It has implications on people sitting outside the clients of the system who are interacting with it. Like if they're trying to, like if it's Tableau, right? And Tableau is trying to cache across users, like whatever user connects as, that's what everyone's going to see, right? But my point, Martin, is that that's a problem we already have today for those who
we do, but
do pass through security.
Sure, but that's kind of an it's almost like an edge case usage. Like for example, we design all the APIs to not take the security context in the metadata calls, because we said, well, we don't want the connector.
No, the metadata calls get it. The security calls don't get session. The metadata calls definitely get identity because they're actually the ones that do pass through security.
Right.
Yeah. Anyways, my point is, like, we actually already have this in some way, so I don't think it's a huge, like, it's not like we're reinventing the world. I'm not saying this isn't like wouldn't be a monster change.
Okay, so I think what we're saying is there's openness to it, but it has to be kind of done in a way that's sane enough that it's not,
I would not characterize that as openness. I would characterize that as, like, by the way, we have something that kind of already kind of looks like this. Like, honestly, you guys could just use that. That was my first recommendation. I'm saying, like, this isn't like, and now we're building something completely different. Like,
Oh, I don't want to build something different. I want to leverage what already exists as much as possible.
Yeah. All right. We have to think about it. I mean, that's my main response.
I think it was brought up well. The metadata between different users will change for those tables, so you're not going to be able to cache that stuff, because one person may see column A, the other person will not see column A, they'll see D, E, F. So caching that content needs to happen at a user level, not at a view and table level. That's a very good point.
Sorry, there weren't enough description of what cache you're talking about, etc. So, like, if you did this, well, again, that's like such a generic word. So if you tried to do this behind the Hive Metastore interface, you would have to disable the cache that sits in front of it. That is a shared cache. You need a per user cache, because, like, different users will see different things. The engine itself doesn't cache anything. That's the job of connectors. Clients like Tableau definitely cache stuff, and they would need to know not to do this. But again, that's something that already happens. Like, people use, like, pass-through security with plenty of stuff. It's an interesting problem.
Nobody else has anything. I'm happy to take over whenever we're done with the current subject. I just didn't want to. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, Eric A and Eric K, do you have a path forward? And, like,
Yep, I think so. I think we can brainstorm the first few steps. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Well, feel free to reach out if you need any next steps. Seems like Dane has already written it in his head.
No, I just because something's possible doesn't mean it's a good idea. Like, I basically said, this isn't impossible, and there are things that do look like this. Whether or not we want to do something is a completely different discussion. So,
Cool.
Not going to say too much about this, but, like, I know we were saying at one point we wanted to talk about what it would look like to do the whole working around codifying and trying to get some of the kind of repository or repo project smarts going on, like around basically setting up like a kind of a code or what is it? What does GitHub call it? The Copilot type stuff, but doing it in a more custom way. And particularly, I remember reaching out or getting connected with this guy, Dave Stein, who is building out this company called Dosu or DOSU. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but it's dosu.dev. Basically, they're working on, doing some of the initial traditional statistical approach to prioritizing your workflow, making a lot of this GitHub stuff, that management stuff that Manfred, myself, and Cole were pretty heavily invested in, much easier and much more efficient. But I've been thinking about ways to make this a lot more streamlined, especially when it comes to like actually like trying to come up with a way to pull out the knowledge of pretty much everybody on this call. Like Martine, Dane, and David, I think have the largest brains that we need to pull out and kind of ascribe or encode their knowledge to different areas of the code. But effectively what my like goal is with this is to try to and build into the workflow or build into the like the pull request initially, but then ultimately encoding other philosophies and snippets of approaches that we're going to take around, best practices, general Java practices that we do or don't do, and then have various areas in the code where we'll have explanations as to why something doesn't follow the traditional paradigm, because we have a lot of these places that require contextual understanding of what's happening in the broad spectrum of the code base, that you have to know the history, or you have to know the specifics of what's going on there. And so I'm really interested in this problem of how do you take that kind of natural language stuff with and particularly not try to shortcut it by just sucking things out of a bunch of PRs and things like that, like having an intentional methodology to annotate this stuff, but then also work it into the regular PR stuff without having too much like upfront work going into basically anybody having to do the mind dump that is required in annotating the code effectively. So I'm talking to the Dasu guy. He's already kind of working in this direction somewhat, and so it was kind of a really cool alignment. And so they already have like a project that does kind of similar things to what a lot of the other ones do, but he's got the right idea in terms of moving in this direction where we're going to be a little more strict on getting very quality data and having it annotated or split up in a way, chunked up in a way or whatever, that you have various levels of granularity of the code that explain different connections and do various analysis in different ways to again keep this information fresh. Whenever we put in something with like an old code comment, you always want to make sure that that gets updated. And I think part of the thing that we're trying to figure out is there a way in a generic, software engineering workflow that it makes it incredibly easy to go through this kind of explanation set of steps to update the information on a particular set of code, and make that actually help out the review process, streamlining all of that stuff and ultimately making it much more feasible for maintainers to understand what's going on, but also then have kind of this other model that we're currently creating, see if there's any conflicts into the approaches that are being taken to what's been done in the past on this particular code base. So it's a lofty goal. It's a lot of stuff to look and research into, but it's one of those things that if you can solve it, it's pretty cool. So I will be talking with Dasu here shortly. I'm working out a couple like small proof of concepts here and there and seeing you know, what where this comes at. But yeah, depending on where this goes, my ultimate goal would be to start working with a couple of the maintainers and start trying to think through some early approaches. At first, you know, to seed everything, it is going to be a bit of a existing automated process. But I think the goal in the long term will be figuring out these kind of UI UX decisions and questions about how do we make this a not super invasive, and in fact, ideally something that promotes better engineering practices, while at the same time, you know, getting the information from you being the contributor at the time of contributing and having your head in that space. I mean, it's even people that forget their own state of mind a month or two later, right? This is also encoding that for you yourself in the future, and why you made certain decisions and things like that. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of this. You know, if you're interested, reach out to me with any ideas, thoughts, and that yeah, I'll let you know what comes, or kind of talk a little bit about what comes from the conversation with the DOSU people. And where we might head with that, because ideally that would take a lot of work off my plate to have to not make my own company to do this, the work they've already done. Yeah, so anyways, just wanted to introduce this concept.
If I can get a tool that will actually like help me like understand the pull request and like show me some suggestions, like basically this line is wrong, this can be improved, and I will be just able to like accept or just like improve the message, then I am like all in.
I think the upfront idea, I talked with David Phillips about this a little bit, which was like, you know, if we could, there's a couple different players involved. Like on one side, it's thinking about encoding all this information so that a net new contributor can actually have like a really helpful person to explain the code to them as best as possible. Then there's also then the use case of the pull request. So when they actually put in the pull request, you know, we have various people care about, you know, various maintainers, I should say, have various like pet peeves. And so hopefully most of those are already encoded and captured in the model in some way. What we might do in the beginning, especially when we're not so sure about the suggestions that, you know, a bot or a model might make, we could put a set of potential, you know, like comments. And if you, whoever's the maintainer, instead of having to go in, do the quick analysis and you know, analyze that, you can go in and look at the comments that were made by the bot, say if you agree with that or not, or edit the comment to actually express what you would care about. And then that's, you know, that change is either accept or not accept, or the delta between what it suggested versus what you actually wanted to express would also be fairly like valuable information for the model as well. So yeah, so that's kind of the idea, at least initially. Again, a lot of this stuff is still like trying to, it's a very early stage, but yeah, like any kind of, you know, design ideas, that kind of thing, once we figure out if I'm working with these DOSU guys or not, or if I'm just kind of going this alone, you know, I'd like to just, yeah, meet with any of you, or if you want, if we maybe can actually collaborate on a doc or something like that, to just kind of put some ideas and thoughts out around this, and I can eventually share the early thoughts that I have and some of the design pieces. But yeah. Yeah, it'll hopefully, I mean, the goal is minimize how much all the people here are needed to get people effective and running, and then, you know, try to minimize the amount of time it takes for a PR review. So cool. That's all I had to say. Did that answer your question, Mateos?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not gonna be
I'm
tomorrow.
not sure. I'm not sure whether we are there yet with like the technology that is like available to us, but I would give it a try and see
Yeah,
like
the
what's
goal
quality
here,
of.
the way I want to approach this separately from like how people typically approach this with like this is going to be, you know, using RAG, but so my understanding of how where it falls short is that people don't have like they don't basically they'll start with some data sets, a large set of data, and then they'll just feed it into, you know, various encodings and chunk up the data in various ways. And you end up getting a lot of noise versus the actual like thing, like the actual answer to your question. And so I think actually starting from the encoding, what's the proper way to like capture this knowledge and save it into a document, you know, and start from there and design outwards. So ideally that goes with most LLMs, but so you don't really have to think about the downstream LLM, but then you think about the upstream, you know, retrieval process. Then you think about, okay, how can I design an application that gets this properly encoded, properly chunked set of code with the annotations and the scope around it? And think about, like, I'm thinking about it more from that perspective, the different level of granularities. Does it make sense to have somebody annotate a null check? No. So, but what about this null check in the context of where it's located? And what are their intentions with this null check? Is it supposed to be throwing an exception or not? And as you get further out, you can, you know, you'll have different variants of like, you know, pieces of you know, I guess larger connected files, like connections of files that will describe how a big piece of, or a big, I guess, a module works altogether, right? And the way I want to start with trying to trace this is looking in previous commits at the files that are commonly overlapping each other. And so if you take a chunk that's commonly changed with each other, you'll have basically an initial thing to say, hey, Martine, this commonly gets updated. You're the person who updates this the most. And these are the associated files to this thing. What would you, is this relating to this module that's handling the ANSI SQL stuff, so on and so forth? And so that's kind of the general vague approach of how I'm going to go at this at the beginning, but it's really heavily focusing on like, how do we properly model this stuff so that when you ask a question about a larger concept like the the language functions or security or this other kind of manager that we have, you know, sitting in there to, I don't know, optimize pushdowns, you should ideally over time, once we've, you know, kind of fine-tuned how things are stored and the different granularities and pieces like that, you know, ideally you could ask something like, tell me, related to this file, what do I need to change outside of this in order to, you know, actually make a change that roughly resembles, I don't know, try to think of, formulate the full question, but do you get what I'm saying? It's really focusing on actually looking at these very minutia of problems, of thinking through people asking these types of things. But yeah.
Hey, sorry, we're like over time. I gotta
Sure.
run. I don't know if you guys want to continue or whatever, but
Yeah, no.
I gotta.
No worries. Sorry.
I know 3 companies that are trying to solve similar stuff in New York City, Brian.
Cool.
So I can connect if you want. My daughter's interning at those the summer, so they're working on.
Yeah, I
similar
mean,
stuff.
I don't want to have to reinvent the wheels here.
Yeah. But let me drop. Okay, bye.
Sounds good. Bye.
You guys go. All right, cool. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.